So I've got a brand new release out at the moment. The track's called In Your Arms. It's out on the Brilliant Motive Records. And I thought I'd take you through the track, how I kind of came up with the idea, all the different elements, basically a full track breakdown. If you're liking the track and want to stream or download it, I'll put a link in the description below so you can get hold of it there. But let's jump into the project. So this is the full Ableton project, all color coded. We've got my drums there in yellow, my bass in blue, in pink there is all the music parts basically. Then we've got my vocals down there, and then finally the effects. Now the whole track basically centers around the vocal, and that's kind of how I started this track. I knew I wanted something high energy, and I kind of found this vocal sample. In your arms, in your arms, in your arms, in your arms. Now I've basically chopped it all up. Let's have a look at the original sample within here. So that's the original sample. I've actually pitched it down 6 semitones and obviously cut it up quite a bit. There was something in that vocal that I just kind of heard that I really liked. And once it was pitched down, it just had a much kind of better quality. In your arms, in your arms, in your arms. That's basically the most I've used of that vocal sample, just that I'm in your arms. And I pretty much cut it up from there. I had a basic beat going and I just kind of started just chopping it all up. In your arms. I kind of really went into the nitty gritty and I really chopped that vocal up. So you've got these kind of real stabs here with a bit of a fade off just to make sure that it kind of makes it a bit more like a stab, a bit more like a pluck. It's really quite a raw vocal and I didn't want to take away from that. So the processing is quite minimal on here. I've got a Neutron 3, which is just the EQ that's taking out the bottom end of the vocal. Got a utility on there, which I'm not actually using. It's just on it's on my chain for every single audio track. I've got Soothe going on there, just getting rid of some of those upper mid frequencies. They sounded a bit harsh, so I just wanted to take some of them out. In your arms, in your arms. Next up, I've got an auto filter in here. This is just taking some of the top end away. I think it was in the breakdown. No, actually, just at the end of the track, it fades the vocal out. In your arms, in your arms, in your arms, in your arms. I really love the auto filter. It's just really simple to use and it has a great effect for kind of fading vocals in and out and making it sound a bit more interesting. Then I've actually got 2 reverbs on here. I've got the standard Ableton reverb, which is on the whole track. It's only about 20%. And I tend to put this on most vocals within my track. The normal Ableton reverb I find works really well on its default settings, and I only have it about 20%. This is what it sounds like without it. In your arms, in your arms. Your arms, in your arms. It just kind of softens the end out there, gives it a little bit more of a tail. Because I've cut it up, I think it needed that kind of tail just to make it all fit together. I've also got Neoverb in here as well, which I'm starting to move more towards. I really like this as a reverb. It seems to work quite well. On this case, I'm actually just using it for the breakdown, and I'm actually automating the dry wet. If I jump into the parameters, you can see I've got the dry wet on automation there. I think that's within the breakdown. Yeah, so here the vocal kind of really washes out. In your arms, 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 your arms, in your arms. Using the dry wet on a reverb is one of my favorite kind of tricks to do, because when you're kind of adding that wet into there, you're taking away from the dry and it almost kind of pushes the vocal away. So it kind of works really well in breakdowns, and then you kind of bring it back again. So you bring all that dry back in again and get rid of the wet, kind of just brings it back towards you again. I've also got the Ozone 9 imager in there as well, just to make it a little bit wider. And I've also got the LFO tool in there as well. That's just ducking the vocal when the beat is kind of happening. Kind of standard across most of my projects. So I took that vocal and I was kind of cutting it up along with a basic beat, and then I started building out the actual beat that I've got. This is kind of what it sounds like with the vocal and just the beats. It's a fairly simple beat, very straight actually, because I wanted this to be kind of driving. The vocal kind of makes it very driving. So really I've just got my kick in there, which actually is a combination of, well, it's a single kick, but it's actually got a saturated side and a kind of dry side. So we've got the dry side, which is here. And then on the saturated side is I'm using Baby Audio's tape, which I absolutely love. I think it's brilliant. But for me, sometimes it takes away some of the bottom end of that kick, makes it a little bit kind of flabby. So sometimes I kind of mix in the saturated signal of tape with the original kind of kick within there. So this is the saturated side. You can see here, I'm kind of taking the bottom end out of that kick and I'm kind of mixing it in with the dry kick. Kind of getting the best of both. There's not too much other processing on here. I've got a Neutron 3 equalizer, which is just taking some of that bottom end out. I actually had OTT on here, but since I've moved on to my new M1 Mac, I haven't installed it, which it just goes to show because I haven't opened this project since I got the new MacBook. So that was on there. It's probably just beefing it up a little bit. I'll need to install that. I've got utility here, which actually makes the kick mono, just makes mixing a little bit easier. And then I've also got an EQ8 here, which kind of carves some of the bottom end out. And this is actually kind of automated. So I think probably at the start of the track or at the end of the track. No, at the end of the track, I kind of take the bottom end of the kick out. I've then got my tops group, which has my clap in there. I've also got an open hat, a shaker hat, just adds a little bit of swing to it, and then a shaker in there. Just a simple shaker loop, just to kind of fill it out a little bit, and then also a 16th note as well. Obviously something I've cut out of a loop, but altogether they work quite nicely. You can kind of hear the shaker and the 16ths all sitting quite low within the mix because I want the core elements to come out. So you got the clap and the open hat. I tend to process all my kind of top drums separately, which is why they're in their own group. On there, I've got the Volf compressor. Absolutely love this. Makes it kind of a little bit more kind of lo-fi, really nice sound. It's not cheap, but it's a great little plugin. I've also got the track spacer on there as well. What this basically does is when the vocal hits, it kind of takes away some of the frequencies of the vocal, so the vocal kind of pops through the mix. I've only done it in a very kind of light amount, but it just kind of makes a little bit more room for that vocal, makes it stick through a little bit more. We've got the auto filter in there again. Again, when I kind of want to automate the top end, take some of the top end out, that's kind of done that in the breakdown, I think. Again, I've got soothe on there, just getting rid of some of those really kind of harsh highs. I've got a reverb on there, which again, I'm automating the dry wet. That's for the breakdown. So just before the breakdown here, we've got everything coming in. And then when it gets to the breakdown, I kind of take some of that top end out and bring up the reverb. So using the filter and the reverb just to kind of create that nice effect within the breakdown. I've also got neoverb on the tops as well. I think just to give it kind of a little bit more air. I think that's probably how I was using it. To be honest, I can't remember my process on this. But I think it probably was just to give those drums just a little bit of air. So yeah, just the tiniest amount of reverb on there. And again, I've got the imager on here just to push some of those highs out wide. And finally, a little bit of fresh air. This is one of my favorite plugins. It's a free plugin, just gives you those highs back again, just those mid highs and the very, very high highs. Definitely recommend picking that one up. And that's my drums group. Next, I moved on to the bass, which I wanted to be really, again, quite driving. So I went for a very kind of straight pattern. It's really just sticking to that A almost all the way throughout, with just a couple of extra notes which kind of make it sound a little bit more interesting. But generally, it's this kind of monotonous kind of driving force in the track. The bass is actually coming from the Sub, one of my favorite patches within here called Strange Thing. It's a really simple kind of instrument, but I love the sub. I think it works just nicely and it works great for my bass. Usually it's one of the first things I go to for bass. It's got some great presets in there. Again, I've got a utility in there. It's just something that's always on my audio channels, and I haven't done anything with that one actually. I've then got the Neutron 3, which I've actually run it through the Mix Assistant, which actually will listen to the track or listen to the bass and then kind of make suggestions as to how to tweak that bass to make it fit better within the mix. I then take that kind of bass line of what it kind of does automatically and then I tweak it myself. For example, I've taken a whole load of the bottom frequencies out, everything below 77 hertz I've taken out, but I've also taken out the top end of the bass as well. Actually got quite a bit of a cut on there. Yeah, everything above 1420 hertz is kind of cut out. So yeah, I really wanted to just pay attention to that bottom end in this track. I can see in here, I've actually got two modules disabled. I've got the exciter and sculptor turned off. Generally, I always get rid of the exciter because it never really gives me a great result. It just seems to distort stuff and it never sounds how I want it to sound. The sculptor can be useful at times, but in this case, it wasn't working for me. So that's why I've turned that off. Again, I've got Soothe on there, which again is kind of demudding that bass a little bit. Just helps a bit more within the mix, that does. Then next up, I've got Duck Buddy in here. Now, I usually always use LFO Tool by Xfer Records, but I actually picked up Duck Buddy just to kind of try it out and see how it was within my tracks. Fundamentally, it's about the same thing. The only thing with Duck Buddy is that it actually uses a trigger for your sidechain, and then you have this envelope for it. I was basically just playing around with it, and it did a very good job on this track, but generally, I still always use LFO Tool. I've then got a simple utility in here just to boost it by 6 dB. The signal that was coming from all of this was a bit low, so I kind of just used the utility just to boost it a little bit. And then again, I've got this kind of low cut in the breakdown, which I kind of activate just by turning the EQ8 on and off. So you can see here, the bass is actually at full here. And then in this breakdown here, I kind of take the bottom end out of the bass. It doesn't sound so great on its own, but when you hear the kind of stabs that I put in as well, it kind of all works together. So that's the drums, the bass and the vocals. Next up, I wanted to kind of get some musical elements in there, maybe some stabs, some chords, something like that. And because I was getting these kind of vibes of this kind of driving bass and the drums and that kind of really hard kind of vocal, I thought about having something a bit funkier in there, maybe a little bit kind of more driving. So I was looking for some stabs and I kind of found this one, which I thought sounded quite nice. So this actually came from reversing a stab. So the original stab is this one here. At least I think that's what I did. I think I reversed it. It sounds like I reversed it. And that's kind of a trick I do with a lot of tracks. I tend to reverse sounds and kind of have them leading into the next bar. So at the end of the bar, it kind of almost kind of swells to something. And that's kind of what I do with like Rhodes, and I do it with stabs and things like that. And altogether, it kind of sounds like this. You can almost hear this kind of call and response from the bass and then the stab. So the bass is kind of, it's doing its kind of chuggy, kind of driving kind of thing. And then at the end of the bar, it kind of leaves a gap for the bass, and then that kind of stab comes in. That's kind of how I usually do most of my tracks. I have two elements that are kind of playing off each other. There's not really much processing going on with this stab, just EQ8, taking some bottom end out. I've kind of balanced it because I think the actual stab was going more towards the right, so I kind of pulled it more over to the left. I've used an auto filter on there as well to kind of fade it in and out, take some of those top frequencies out, you know, throughout the whole track. LFO Tool again, just to do a bit of ducking on that, so it's kind of fitting in with the rest of the beat. And then I also have the pan. In fact, I think the LFO Tool might be the thing that's actually, maybe that stab isn't quite reversed. Maybe it's just fading in. Let me turn that off for a second. Okay, I'm telling a lie. I didn't actually reverse that stab. I thought I did. That's what it sounded like. But I'm actually using the LFO tool here to kind of almost kind of fades it in with a kind of an envelope. You can see here within the LFO tool, because that stab actually hits on the beat, it's ducking it. It's going from 0 to 100 and it kind of fades it in. Gives that kind of almost like reversed effect, but you still have that kind of hit of the stab. I've also got another stab that happens at the start of a bar occasionally within the track. As you can see there, it's just a disco hit, just something in the mix just to kind of pronounce that the bar is starting. As far as elements go, that's pretty much the whole track. I kind of just filter things in and out and kind of play with taking things away and putting it back in again, just to kind of add some variation through the track. You can hear I've got some effects going on within here as well. I think this was just an effect that I found on Splice and I kind of played around with it. It's kind of a downer kind of effect, but then I then reversed the sample and did it so it kind of rose as well. Kind of just filled everything up quite nicely, and in fact it sounds like I've got a bit of echo on there. Yeah, I've got a bit of echo on there just to kind of echo it out at the end. In fact, it looks like I've recorded it from somewhere, so it might have actually been a patch from a synth. I'm not quite sure how I came up with that effect. It might have just been a patch from a synth that I recorded in. Again, not quite sure how I do most of these things. I kind of just vibe on stuff in the studio and just see what kind of comes out. One of my favorite parts in the track, however, is the breakdown. I really love that bit. I kind of took it real kind of old school. I wanted this kind of big warehouse kind of feel. And I did that with using a different type of bass. I've actually got, I think, another patch from the sub. Yeah, this one's called Asteroid. And it's more of a kind of almost an 808 kind of sounding bass, I guess. Yeah, kind of distorted 808. Not hardly any processing going on there, just a bit of the bottom end taken out. And I've got just 3 simple notes within there. Then I've also got this really kind of luscious pad, which is actually coming from the Monopoly. It's a patch within there called Copeland New. It's just one that I found that I thought sounded quite nice. To really kind of thicken it up, I went into minor 9th chords, which is basically just a minor chord. Then I've added a 7th and a 9th within there. Just thickens it up and it works really nicely for pads. As far as processing goes, there's not really anything on there again. In fact, I haven't even got an EQ on there, which is very weird because I always have an EQ on pretty much every track just to get rid of those bottom frequencies that might cause issues within the mix. But for some reason, I haven't got one on there, which is weird. I've also got an auto filter on there, which I haven't ended up using. I think what I was going to do is I was filtering it out at the end of the breakdown. And instead I've gone with the utility. If I go to here, you can see the automation on here. I've actually got it fading out at the end of the breakdown. So maybe I just decided I didn't want to use that auto filter on there. I've also got a held string within here. Now, usually I always use the M1 for this, but for some reason I went for a sample on this track. I'm not quite sure why. Yeah, not quite sure on that one. But again, it's just a simple sample that I pulled from somewhere, getting rid of some of that bottom end with the EQ. And then I've also added a phaser on there just to kind of give it a little bit of movement. It's one of those kind of effects that would have been used in kind of old school house. So I kind of wanted that kind of phasing kind of feel to it. And then again, I've got this utility at the end of the chain, which is actually just automating the volume. So the string kind of just fades in over time in that breakdown. And then at the end of the breakdown, I also have this kind of snare fill happening as well, which is something that I did in XO. I usually just tend to do my drum fills within MIDI, but for some reason today I decided to do it in XO. Yeah, I think I was just trying to get the right snare sound, and for me using XO is just a quicker way of kind of getting my beats together and finding that right sample that I want to use. I got a lot of processing within here. I've got rid of some of that bottom end on that EQ. I'm automating the volume by the look of it as well. And I've also got tape within here just to add a bit of crunch to that snare. I've also got a bit of auto pan in here as well, just to make that snare go from the left and the right. Just makes it sound a little bit less static. And then I've also got the auto filter in here, which is kind of filtering in over time. time. Also in the breakdown where everything kind of fades away, I kind of take away that main vocal, and I wanted to have something in there that kind of went with that main vocal. So the main kind of lyrics of that vocal were "in your arms," and I found this other little kind of sample here which I thought might sound quite nicely within that breakdown.
He wanted to take her in his arms and smother her with kisses and drown himself in the beauty of her soul.
I thought it sounded quite cool, very lo-fi, and to kind of almost boost that lo-fi, I did a bit of EQing to it, a bit harsh EQing. I took out that bottom end and boosted some of those highs just so the kind of pronunciation of those words kind of came through the mix a little bit better. I then put a bit of echo on it, a little bit of reverb on it, just to kind of make it fit nicely within the mix. But the real big thing with this was kind of making it kind of echo out at the end, and to do that I used the sends on that. So you can see here I've got this kind of send automation going, and on my first send I've got this kind of long echo. There's 103% feedback, which means it kind of feeds back on itself, and that's why it kind of builds, the kind of echo kind of builds into the next part. So altogether the breakdown kind of has this real kind of atmospheric kind of feel to it.
He wanted to take her in his arms and smother her with kisses and drown himself in the beauty of her soul. In your arms, 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 in your
So yeah, that breakdown is my favorite part of the track. It really kind of takes away from that driving nature, gives it this big kind of atmospheric kind of club feel to it, and then you come back into it at the end of that kind of snare fill. And that's basically how this track came together. It all started with that vocal sample and the fact that I really wanted to create something with a bit more energy. Recently I've been making a whole load of kind of deeper and funkier stuff, mainly because I've been locked away in the studio. But now as things are starting to open back up again, I want to make something with a bit more energy, and that's kind of how this track came together. It's out now on Motive Records to stream and download in most stores. I'll put a link in the description underneath this video. But if you want to see more of these track breakdowns, I've got loads more on my channel. I'll link them up here in these thumbnails up here. And also subscribe to the channel because I add things as often as I can do. As soon as I kind of come up with an idea, I usually put it on this channel, and also track breakdowns all the time. So definitely get subscribed, and hopefully I'll see you again soon on the dance floor.